So Loving Lamb has appeared. And I forgot to bring the picture. There was this picture that was sent to Venerable children. It's a picture of His Holiness, and he's holding this little lamb like this one next to his cheek, and he has this beautiful, loving expression on his face. So I think that's what inspired. It was Venerable Tsepel, right, to get Loving Lamb.
She led the discussion.
Who? Really? Wow.
She set the motivation and she put out the questions.
Okay, so you've already met Loving Lamb then.
She's been eavesdropping behind the curtain for the
Oh,
teachings.
okay. So she knows all this stuff. She's very experienced. So there was a little bit left of what I was talking about this morning. Cultivating love, loving kindness. So where we left off, I was talking about how one way to increase love is to overcome the things that obstruct this feeling of love, loving kindness. And so they include anger and hatred, which are the totally opposite state of mind. Attachment, self-centeredness, jealousy. So we all do experience those at certain times, and it's good to be aware of them and acknowledge. Don't deny, try to pretend you don't have them. That doesn't work. They don't go away by themselves. So we do have to recognize them and acknowledge them and not beat ourselves up for having these states of mind, because everyone has them. As long as we're in samsara and not enlightened, not in nirvana, then we still have these states of mind. So you're not the only one in the world that has them. It's best to accept them and then apply antidotes, work on overcoming them, and slowly they can be reduced. And it's also good to just get to know your mind, like observe your mind and your habitual tendencies, and try to recognize what, if any, aspects of your mind and your way of being are obstacles to love, feeling love. So they would be different for each people, each person. So we have to look at our own experience and figure those out. I was thinking some other, kind of emotional states or mental states that might interfere with love would be depression, for example. If you have a tendency to get depressed, I know I do. And, when you're depressed, you just want to stay by yourself. It's hard even to be with people and talk with people. You just want to kind of stay alone and maybe even stay in bed and pull the covers over your head. So it's hard to interact with people. So if that is a problem you fall into sometimes, then good to look for antidotes for depression, to work on depression. And actually they say that when we do feel depressed, even though we don't feel like going out and doing anything, it's actually good to do that. Make an effort to get out and do some exercise, meet people, interact with people, and do like volunteer work, because they've done research on this and found that when we do things to help others, there are more endorphins, the hormone that makes us feel happy, more of that hormone in our system. So we do feel happier. So you may have to make some effort to get out there, but when you are involved with people, and especially in a helpful way, doing things that help people, you're going to feel better. So that itself is an antidote to depression. But of course, if there's other causes of depression that maybe you need help from a therapist or even medication to deal with, then you can also use those. And maybe shyness. Some people are very, very shy, and it's difficult for them to meet people, talk to people, and so on. So that could be another obstacle to, having loving interactions with others. I mean, of course, you can still generate feelings of love, even if you're not, communicating with and interacting with others. You can still have those feelings of love in your mind. But it's nice to be able to express them as well, to show your love to others. So if shyness is a problem, an obstacle. And again, actually, cultivating loving kindness can be an antidote to shyness. I think I mentioned that story in Howard Cutler's book, The Art of Happiness, where he asked the Dalai Lama if he ever feels frightened when he has to give a talk in front of many, many people, thousands, tens of thousands of people. And the Dalai Lama says he does, and he deals with that by contemplating the people who he's going to talk to and generating compassion and love and wanting to benefit them. And he said that gives him courage to go into that situation rather than feeling frightened and anxious. And then Howard Cutler passed this on to one of his clients or patients who was very, very shy, and it was helpful for him. So if we do cultivate more love, compassion, kindness, the wish to help others, then that we may notice that gives us the courage to approach people and talk to people. And then that will help us with shyness. Another problem might be pride, arrogance. This is actually another of the afflictive states of mind explained in Buddhism, one of the root afflictions. So this is where we feel we are superior to others and we look down on them. So that's, I think, pretty clearly an obstacle to love. Because if we feel I am better than you, that's not a loving state of mind. So if you notice that in your mind, then be aware of it. And so this subject of noticing afflictive states of mind or deluded states of mind is a huge topic, and there's a lot of material. Geshe Chodak is going through that. He's already done there's one Saturday, full one-day course, and then a weekend course, and there's another weekend course coming up at the end of this month on that very topic of working with afflictions. So if that's something you haven't learned before, then you can watch the previous talks. They're online, I think. Should be on the YouTube channel. So you can watch the previous ones and the upcoming ones. But anyway, this is one thing, is recognize what are the obstructions or the obstacles to feeling love and showing love, and then work on overcoming those. And then the second point is meditating on loving kindness. So there's different ways of doing that, different kinds of meditation, but the usual way is to bring to mind different people. And it's actually more effective to do this with individuals, one person at a time, rather than a whole group of people. I mean, of course, it's nice, like when we recite the prayer of the four immeasurables, to say, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. But that's such a huge group, all sentient beings, that it's kind of vague. And so the feeling we generate in that way wouldn't be so strong. Whereas if we think of individual people, like one person at a time, and really focus on that person and contemplate how they want to be happy, and we want them to be happy, and then spend some time generating the wish for that person to be happy, and then move to the next person. So you just do as many individual people as you can in a session. So Lama Tsongkhapa actually recommends that. He says it's much better to do it that way rather than for a big group of people. Your loving kindness will be more strong and genuine. And then when you're not in meditation, but you're interacting with people in your daily life, then the feeling of loving kindness will be more, more present, more genuine. Whereas if you sit on your meditation cushion and say, may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes, and meditate like that, but then when you get up and go about your daily activities and you meet individual sentient beings, your whatever thoughts you had in your meditation cushion might not be there. So it's more effective to do one person at a time. And it's recommended to start with easy objects, like the people that we know and already have good feelings for. So start by bringing them to mind, and then cultivating this this attitude. And the last bullet point mentions phrases. So this is one way of doing it, is you can have some phrases, and these are just suggestions, but you can write your own phrases, use words and ideas that resonate with you and you feel good about. But some standard ones are, may you be happy. Yeah, so you focus on a person, imagine that person in front of you, and then just say that phrase to yourself. May you be happy. May you be safe, free of harm and danger. May you have what you need to be happy and satisfied. May your thoughts and deeds always be positive and beneficial. So those are just phrases that I use, but like I say, you can write your own, your own words, your own thoughts. So the point is to, express wishes for the other person to be happy in different ways, like being safe and having what they need to be happy. So you can just write those phrases and then repeat them in your mind as you're contemplating that person. And some people, when they try to do this kind of meditation, whether on their own or in a group, say that they don't feel anything. They're saying these words, may you be happy, but they don't actually feel the feeling behind those words. And I think this. Everyone has different experience. So some people may be able to have that actual feeling, but other people don't. So if you don't have that feeling, I don't think you should worry. It could be that you just need to do the practice more often, get more familiar with it, more used to it, and then slowly the feeling will arise. So you shouldn't worry if the feeling isn't there, as long as you are trying to do the practice and saying these words and trying to generate those thoughts. Even if the feeling isn't there, it's okay. And I heard a talk by one Buddhist teacher who said that he learned this meditation on loving kindness, and I think I'm trying to remember the time periods he said. I think he said for the first 5 years of doing this practice, he was just saying the words but not really feeling them. But only after about 5 years of doing the practice, he actually started to mean. What he said was, then I would in the beginning I would just say the words, but I didn't really mean them. Right? He was just saying the words, but without really feeling it. And then after 5 years, he would mean what he said, but still I think he didn't have the feeling. So it took him another 5 years to actually feel that feeling, behind the words, that feeling of loving kindness. So when I heard him say that, I thought, wow, I really admired his perseverance, that he didn't give up. Some people would give up, and feel, oh, this isn't working. But he didn't. He kept doing it. And as a result of that, finally, the feeling came. It may not take that long for you, so don't worry. But that's just an example of how it can take a while before the feeling is there. And that's fine. Yeah. It's good enough just to do the practice and repeat those phrases, those words, try to generate the feeling. But even if it doesn't come right away, don't worry about it. Just keep doing it. And another thing that can be nice to do when you're doing this meditation is you're focusing on a specific person, generating the wish for them to be happy. And then imagine giving things to that person, giving them gifts, giving them things that will make them happy. Either you're giving them those things, or just imagine them getting those things, like nice food that they like to eat, giving them a bunch of flowers, having them live in a really nice house and so on, having friends. So think of the specific things that would bring happiness to that person, and imagine giving those things to them, and then imagine them receiving them, being happy, looking happy. So that makes the meditation, I think, more alive, more real than just sitting there and saying these phrases, but maybe nothing's actually happening with the other person. So, yeah, it's quite nice to imagine making the other person happy, helping them to have happiness. So there's just one more slide here. Oh, words shouldn't have been there. Yeah, so I heard it was actually Ajahn Brahm, who I mentioned earlier. He said that for him, he uses adorable beings, like cute little puppies and kittens, to generate a feeling of loving kindness. To kind of kickstart the feeling. So puppies and kittens may not work for everybody. Maybe a parakeet, a goldfish, whatever, different things work for different people. So think of at least one type of being that enables you to get in touch with that feeling of loving kindness and caring and wanting to help. So that's a good place to start. So once you get that feeling there, then you think of other people, other beings, and generate that same feeling for them. But with this kind of method, we do have to be careful, because we may feel these very nice, fond feelings for cute, adorable puppies and kittens, but do we have that same feeling for cockroaches and slugs? Yeah, that's a little harder. But we do need to recognize that the feeling that we have for, cute sentient beings, adorable sentient beings, we do eventually want to develop that same feeling for others, even those who aren't so cute and adorable. And this actually shows how attachment is a obstacle to genuine loving kindness. Yeah. So if the person or the being is attractive to us, they have an attractive appearance. And the way they behave is something that makes us feel good. So they make us feel good. They make us feel happy. So in that kind of situation, there's attachment involved. It's not pure and unconditional love, loving kindness for the other person, the other being, but it's mixed with, they make me feel good. They're pleasant for me. So, so that can help us recognize, how attachment can get mixed up in our feelings of love. And yeah, that makes sense. So it will take time to develop that same kind of feeling for other beings who aren't as adorable or behave in ways that we find pleasing. But just to understand that eventually that is something we need to do. So the way of meditating, doing meditation to cultivate loving kindness, maybe, I don't know who's leading the meditation tonight, but maybe this could be tonight's meditation, is to, for me, this is the most effective way, is to start by getting in touch with that feeling, at least trying to get in touch with that feeling of loving kindness. And you can do that by thinking of a cute little sentient being, puppy, a kitten, a little child, or someone you really have fond feelings for, you really care about. So bringing that person to mind, imagining them in front of you, and letting your natural feelings for that person arise. So in that way you have a feeling of loving kindness. You know what that feeling is like. And then bring to mind other people, starting with people that are easy to like, easy to have good feelings for. So bring, family members, friends, and so on. Bring them to mind one by one, and just spend some time on each one using those phrases if you find that helpful, and trying your best to generate the wish for that person, that being, to be happy. And if you have more time, more energy, you can also contemplate the different kinds of happiness, not just, of course, we do want them to have food and clothes and shelter and all the basic things to be comfortable and happy. But then you can also think about the higher forms of happiness, spiritual happiness that comes from generating positive states of mind, virtue, and then transforming their mind and attaining realizations and eventually reaching enlightenment. So all the different kinds of happiness, all the way up to enlightenment, wishing for them to have those. So they say it's good in the beginning to do this practice with people and beings that it's easy to have these feelings for. And then when you get more familiar with the practice, you can start to think about people you're more distant from, the strangers. Don't go to enemies right away, but strangers. They're a little more challenging than friends, but not as difficult as enemies. So we bring to mind strangers, people we don't know very well. Or they could be people we know, but just not very well, so we don't have very strong feelings for. They could be neighbors, people we work with, distant relatives, and so on. So then work on cultivating loving kindness for those people in the same way. And then, again, with more practice and more familiarity with this meditation, then you can start working on the difficult people, the so-called enemies. And might be better to start with those people towards whom your feelings are not super strong, anger or hatred, but just mild dislike, aversion, irritation. So start with the milder enemies and then gradually work on more difficult ones. And so it's a gradual process, starting with the easier objects and then a little more difficult and then the most difficult. And when bringing to mind difficult people, people who may have harmed you or people who have done harmful things to others or in the world, just notice if you have any resistance, if there's resistance coming up in your mind. and then work with that. See if you can overcome that. So one thing which I mentioned earlier is separating the person and their actions or their attitudes that you don't like, that you consider harmful. And contemplating, the person isn't 100% bad without any good qualities and doesn't do harmful things 100% of the time. So those are just part of the person, part of the totality, but not all of the totality. So try to recognize that the person does have some positive qualities, and some of the things they do are good, beneficial, helpful. And then with regard to those qualities or activities that you don't like or that are harmful, understand where those come from, why the person is like that, why they're doing those things. According to Buddhism, it's because of ignorance, not knowing the true nature of things, probably also ignorance of karma, not knowing what kind of actions are virtuous, bring happiness, what kind of actions are non-virtuous, bring suffering. So being unaware of that, the person is acting in ways that just bring more suffering, both to themselves and to others. And they have these other afflictions in their mind, pride, maybe arrogance, greed, hatred, the usual, like us, but maybe much stronger, and they probably don't know how to manage them. They may not have learned any methods, any tools with which to manage their mind, manage their afflictions, and maybe they don't see any need to do that. Maybe they're really deluded and they think that whatever they're doing is completely fine, and they don't need to change at all. So just understand that the person's mind is heavily influenced by these afflictions and mistaken ways of thinking, and just very, very deluded. And so it's very sad that they're in that situation. And also to understand that when the mind is afflicted that way, as we know from our own experience, it's not a peaceful, happy state of mind. It's not a enjoyable state of mind. It's painful. It's agitated. It's disturbed. It's almost like being in hell. So in fact, the person is not happy even now with those delusions in their mind. And then what they're doing, they're creating the cause for even more suffering and more problems in the future. So if we can contemplate that, get an understanding of that, then that can help us to stop hating the person and instead feel compassion for them and the wish to help them, to reach out and help them rather than harming them. Because if we act in maybe we have thoughts of wanting to harm the person, but if we were to act those out, then what? Would we feel good about ourselves? And why give more suffering to the person who already has so much suffering? So it's kind of illogical. It doesn't really make sense to harm the person or wish them to be harmed, wish suffering to come to them. So sometimes these thoughts take a while to sink in and make sense and bring about changes in our mind, but it's so much better than being angry, hateful, aggressive, and so on. Also, to pass on a comment by Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo, wonderful teacher, English nun who's been a meditator, long-term meditator. So I once heard her say something that I thought was really clever. She said, it makes sense to have love for enemies or people who do harmful things, because love is wanting them to be happy. Right now, they're not happy. That's why they're behaving the way they are, right? I mean, we can look at our own experience. The times when we're happy, we're feeling good, we're feeling happy. At those times, we don't normally do harmful things, destructive things, negative things. Yeah, we want to do good. We want to help others. But it's when we are unhappy, when our mind is agitated, angry, stressed, we're in a not good state of mind. Those are the times when we act in harmful ways, right? So it's when there's suffering inside of our minds that we do harmful things. And the same is true for this other person. They're suffering. And because their mind is in a disturbed, deluded, unhappy state, that's why they're behaving the way they are. Now, if we were to wish them happiness, may you be happy. Wouldn't it be great if this person could be happy, if their mind could be genuinely happy? Especially the second kind of happiness that comes from positive states of mind, virtuous states of mind. If they could have that kind of happiness, then they'd stop doing those negative things. Yeah, they'd be a nice person rather than a nasty person, horrible person. So it makes complete sense. It's completely logical to wish them to be happy. If they could be happy, then they'd be a lot easier to get along with. So I thought that was quite clever. I hadn't thought of that before, but yeah. So that might help you as well. And also understand that we don't have to like everything about a person or agree with everything that a person thinks and says and does in order to have love for them and wish them to be happy. Okay, so a person can have different political opinions, different religious ideas than ours or whatever. Different ways of thinking, different habits than ours. But that shouldn't be an obstacle for us to have love for them, to have the wish for them to be happy, wish them happiness. By seeing them as just another human being like ourselves, wanting to be happy, wanting to avoid suffering. So go down to that level. Don't focus so much on the differences, but focus more on the commonalities, the things we have in common, the things we share. This is just another person like me, in a human body, with a human mind, in samsara, with afflictions and karma, not completely free. And they're just trying to be happy. They're just trying to make the best of things. And even the things they do that we may judge as wrong or bad, they're probably just attempts to be happy. Maybe they're very misguided and very deluded, but those things are just their attempts to be happy, to find happiness. So contemplating that, getting that into our mind is helpful to clear our mind for having loving kindness for them. And then ourself. So in the traditional teachings, at least in the Tibetan tradition, it isn't normally mentioned to generate love for ourselves. It's, you may have heard this story. Once the Dalai Lama was meeting with a number of Western Buddhist teachers. Some of them were also psychologists, therapists, and they were discussing teaching Buddhism and teaching meditation in the West. And one of the teachers spoke about how when leading meditation on loving kindness, it's important to ask people to generate love for themselves as well as for others, because so many people don't love themselves and even hate themselves. So the Dalai Lama was sitting there and he was puzzled. He knows English, he understands English, but he didn't understand what she was saying. I guess he thought this was very strange. And I heard, the version that I heard was he had to speak for a while with a translator, probably Thupten Jinpa, before he understood what this teacher was saying. And then he was like really surprised. He said, "What? You mean there's people who hate themselves?" Like he'd never heard of that before. And this was a long time ago, I think a few decades ago. And now he's quite aware of this problem, and he addresses it when he's teaching, especially in the West. He says, it is important to love yourself, have compassion for yourself, because if you don't, you won't be able to have love and compassion for others. So, so even if it's not mentioned in the traditional texts in the Tibetan tradition and so on, for our contemporary situation, it is something that we need to include. Unless you already have very good feelings for yourself. But many of us, many Western people, do not. And so it's important to look at that and see if in your mind you do have the tendency to criticize yourself, beat yourself up, look down on yourself, feel bad, feel guilty. This kind of inner voice that's very self-critical. So if that is there in your mind, be aware of it and know that it's not correct. This is not something positive, something constructive. It's very counterproductive, because if we engage in self-hatred and self-criticalness, it becomes very difficult to have genuine love and compassion for others. I know this very well from my own experience, because if there's things about yourself that you don't like and that you're critical of, then when those things show up in other people, you're going to feel the same way, right? The things you don't like in yourself, you won't like in others. So that's an obstacle to being able to really accept and forgive and have love and compassion for others. So if it's a long-term habit, then it will probably take time to change. You won't be able to change it overnight, but at least become aware of it when it's happening in your mind, and try to distance yourself from it rather than get totally caught up in it and feed it and perpetuate it. And find ways that will help you to change that. Learn to be kind to yourself. I mean, one way is simply, to think of the loving kindness that you are able to feel towards your friends and your family and your pets and so on. And then, get in touch with that feeling and then direct it at yourself as well. Just even say to yourself, may I be happy. May I be free of suffering, and so on. And try to feel you do deserve it. According to Buddhism, everyone deserves happiness. Everyone deserves to be free of suffering. It's like our nature, our right, our human right, our right as sentient beings to have happiness and freedom from suffering. This is the whole point of Buddhist teachings, is to show us how to be happy and how to be free of suffering. And every single one of us is able to do it and deserves it. We are all deserving of that. It's like our Buddha nature. Yeah. So those are some thoughts that you might contemplate to counteract any tendency to be critical or hateful towards yourself. And also, another thing that may be helpful is if you feel comfortable visualizing the Buddha or visualizing Chenrezig or Tara or any of these Buddhist deities, to think of them, imagine them present with you, and think that from their point of view, there's no anger, there's no criticalness, there's no judgmentalness, there's none of that stuff that you put on yourself, feel towards yourself. They have none of that. It's just pure, unconditional acceptance and love and compassion and forgiveness. So try to see yourself as the Buddhas see you, as Chenrezig sees you, as Tara sees you. So try that. And you probably need to do it a number of times to believe it, to believe that it's true, and for it to start to make changes in your self-criticalness. And I heard Ajahn Brahm talk about at what point should you include yourself in the meditation if you're meditating on cultivating loving kindness and compassion for friends and enemies and strangers, friends, strangers, and enemies. So where should you put yourself? So some teachers recommend putting yourself first, starting by cultivating loving kindness for yourself, because of that idea that if you can't love yourself, you can't really love others. So start with yourself. But Ajahn Brahm said, maybe you should put yourself last, because you're the hardest. That's the hardest one to love. So save it for last. After you've gone through meditating on all the loving kindness for all these other people, then by that time, hopefully, you have a good feeling for loving kindness, and then you can extend it to yourself. Well, I deserve that too. I want to be happy too. So you can try different ways and see what works best. Again, everyone is different. But just to know that we do need to include ourselves in this cultivation of love, loving kindness. And then it's also quite important to bring this feeling of loving kindness into our daily life, not just leave it on the cushion. So you're sitting on a cushion, generating all these positive feelings, wishing others to be happy. And then you get up and forget that feeling and go into your day and, don't practice loving kindness for others. So try to keep it in mind as much as you can when you're going to work or going shopping or going to school or interacting with others in whatever you're doing. It's hard to remember it all the time, but maybe you can try to find little reminders of it to keep you going during the day. And it doesn't need to be something long, just in a moment. If you walk into your office or you walk onto a bus or a train and just think, may all these people be happy. I wish all of them to have happiness and the cause of happiness. So just in less than a minute, you can remind yourself of that feeling. And you'll probably notice it really puts you in a different state of mind. So before we finish this topic of love, loving kindness, I'd like to just read what His Holiness says. So this is from volume 5, which is called In Praise of Great Compassion. He says, the seed of love is in the mind of each of us. The seed doesn't need to be newly generated, but we do need to learn the method to enhance it. Both love and compassion need to be consciously cultivated. So everyone does have the seed of both love and compassion. Even criminals, terrorists, dictators, people who do horrible things, animals, all living beings, they do have that seed in their mind. It's part of our mind, and it just needs to be watered, nourished, so that it can grow. So he says, then he goes on to say, the observed object of love is sentient beings who are bereft of happiness And the subjective aspect is the wish for them to have happiness and its causes. So that's kind of technical language for the mind, but it basically means we are focusing on sentient beings who want happiness but lack genuine happiness. And then the attitude we have with regard to them is wishing them to have happiness and its causes. Love wishes others to have happiness and its causes, as in how wonderful it would be if they had happiness and its causes. May they have these. Because love is preceded by equanimity towards friends, strangers, and enemies, we seek to cultivate love toward all beings, excluding none. This kind of love is immense. Its field is vast. It extends to each and every sentient being, no matter how they treat us. Its goal is vast. It wishes them to have every happiness, from the smallest pleasure up to the happiness of having eliminated all obscurations and being able to easily work for the benefit of all sentient beings. So in other words, enlightenment. So we're wishing them every type of happiness, from the smallest pleasure all the way up to the highest happiness of enlightenment. We also relinquish a vast amount. We willingly give up our own enjoyments and even our own life for the benefit of sentient beings. So he's talking about the ideal. This is kind of what we aspire to get to that point of being able to feel this love for every living being without exception, and being able to even give up our life for their benefit. So, of course, we can't have that right from the beginning, but by working on it gradually, we will be able to eventually reach that point. Okay, any questions about this point before we move on to the next one?
Yes, I was wondering if we could include loving kindness in Chenrezig sadhana.
What do you mean
Well,
include it?
just somewhere in the sadhana to include mini practice of loving kindness.
Well, I mean, that's...
Or does it need to be done separately?
No, you can do whatever you want. Are you talking about you personally when you're doing the practice?
Right.
Or as a group here, or what?
Just I was concerned, for myself, if I could do that.
Sure, of course. Yeah. And you could find a way of doing it. For example, when reciting the four measurables, that prayer, at that point, you could just pause and just spend some time really cultivating loving kindness. Yeah, that would be very good, very powerful.
Thank you.
And also when visualizing Chenrezig above your head and above everyone else's head. And when we say Chenrezig is the embodiment of compassion of all the Buddhas, but he also has love. Compassion and love are very, very close. I like to think of them as sort of two sides of a hand. They're a little bit different, compassion and love are somewhat different, but very similar and very close. So the more we cultivate love, then the easier it is to have compassion, and vice versa. These kind of support each other. So, yeah, if you want, you can think of Chenrezig when you're visualizing Chenrezig and try to get a sense of Chenrezig's love as well as compassion extending towards all living beings, and then aspire to be able to have that feeling yourself, that kind of universal and conditional love and compassion.
You mentioned giving, but I've heard of the taking and giving meditation. So is that to develop something other than loving kindness? And how do you choose what you're going to do, or do people do both?
Yeah, the taking and giving, or tonglen in Tibetan, that's part of the other method for developing bodhicitta. So my plan is we're almost done with this one, and we should be able to finish the 7 points tomorrow. And then I'll explain briefly the other method, and the Tonglen, or taking and giving practice, is included in that. So I'll give a little bit of explanation. But you just reminded me of something else. One time I was giving a talk on loving kindness, and at the end there was Q&A, and one woman put up her hand and said, because we're wishing sentient beings to have happiness and to have whatever they need to be happy and so on. So she said her mother is never satisfied with what she has. She's always wanting more and more and more and more. So she, buys many, many things, and is that kind of person. So she said, so when I'm cultivating loving kindness from my mother, does that mean I should wish her to have all of those things that she wants? And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I never thought about that. And so thinking about it, what I came up with was maybe it's more appropriate to wish her to have satisfaction rather than endless stuff, right? Because all of those things, that stuff that, whatever, clothes, jewelry, and so on, that's not really going to make her happy. That's not where real happiness comes from. It just leads, like the Buddha said, it just leads to more dissatisfaction. So, in that case, it would be more appropriate to wish the person to reach a point where they feel satisfied with what they have. Satisfaction, contentment, rather than this endless sort of greed and need. So, so in case anyone has that kind of question, or there's somebody who's like that, it doesn't mean you have to keep giving them every single thing that they desire, because that really isn't good for them. That was just, I hadn't heard any teacher talk about that, but that's just what came up in my mind to that question, and it makes sense to me. So that's like the second type of happiness, not just the first one. The mother is just stuck on the first type of happiness, wanting more and more and more stuff, things, pleasures, and so on. But, that kind of happiness or pleasure isn't really satisfying. And so if she could have the second type of happiness, which comes from inner qualities like love and compassion, contentment, joy, wisdom, wishing those qualities for the person, then that's a higher form of happiness. Okay, so let's move on to number 5. The 5th of the points in this method is compassion. So compassion is defined as wishing others to be free of suffering. So like I say, compassion and love are quite similar. They're positive feelings of concern for others, but they have a little bit of a different emphasis. So when we notice that somebody is suffering, physically, mentally, both, then compassion is what arises. We wish that person to be free of their suffering, and we wish to help them to be free of their suffering. And then when we're focused more on the person's happiness, or their wish to have happiness that they may not have, then that the feeling we have is wishing that they could have that happiness, wanting happiness for them. So it's just a little bit different emphasis. And so we have the seed of compassion, and probably we all experience compassion at least sometimes when someone we love and care about is in pain or unwell or unhappy. So when we notice this person we love, we care about, is not happy and is suffering, naturally we feel moved in our heart We want them to be free of that suffering. And we want to do what we can to relieve them. So that's the feeling of compassion. So we already have it, but we need to work on developing it, cultivating it, to feel it from more and more and more people. Because His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, if our compassion is limited to just a certain number of people, we feel it for some, but not for others, that's not genuine compassion. It's probably mixed with attachment. I have compassion for my family and friends. They're important to me. They make me happy, so I want them to be happy too and not suffer. But I mean, it is compassion, but it's like ordinary compassion, whereas we're trying to cultivate a more genuine spiritual compassion for more and more people and beings. And one time in a class with one of my teachers, who's also one of Venerable Children's teachers, Khenso Jama Tekchok, he threw out this question to us: why do the Buddhas feel compassion for all sentient beings? It seemed like a pretty simple question, and different people were, offering answers, and he wasn't happy with any of the answers that people gave. So it kind of went on for a long time, and nobody gave the answer he was looking for. And finally he said, it's because the Buddhas have, I can't remember the exact words, but something to the effect of, the Buddhas can directly see the kindness that they have received from every sentient being. So it's what we've been talking about, how every sentient being has been our mother and also our father and this and that, and they've provided us with food and clothes and so on and so forth. So a Buddha has total recall of all the past lives they have ever had, and is able to see the connection that they've had with every sentient being, and is able to directly see that, all the help that they have received from every sentient being. And anyway, it was quite remarkable the way he explained it. It was like, wow, I never really thought about that before. But yes, a Buddha whose mind is totally open and sees everything, knows everything, understands everything, and is able to see all their own past lives and the past lives of others as well, that they would be able to have that direct experience. It's hard for me to even imagine what that would be like, but if you could have that direct experience, really remembering this person has done this person has done that, they've all been my mother and gave birth to me and fed me and took care of me when I was a tiny infant. And so if you had direct memory of that, then wow, how could you not have love and compassion for those beings? So that was quite powerful to listen to, think about. So in this volume, Volume 5, in Praise of Great Compassion, the Dalai Lama says that compassion depends on two principal attitudes. One is a sense of closeness with others, and two is concern for their suffering. So for the first one, a sense of closeness, that comes by seeing sentient beings as endearing through remembering their kindness. So we say remembering their kindness, that it doesn't mean literally we can remember all our past lives, but it's more a sense of contemplating, being mindful of, not forgetting the fact that we have received all this kindness from others. So keeping that in mind, each of these beings has been kind to me many times in past lives and will be kind to me in future lives as well. So keeping that in mind, that leads to this sense of closeness to others, seeing them as dear and precious. So he says that contemplation creates a sense of intimacy and affection towards others in our heart. And then if we contemplate how they undergo all kinds of suffering, that brings concern for their suffering. So those two things need to be developed in order to have compassion, feeling close to others and contemplating their suffering. And just as, with love, we wish others to have happiness, and there's different kinds of happiness. And so with compassion, wishing others to be free of suffering, there's also different kinds of suffering. So these are explained in the Lam Rim, in what's called the middle scope section of the Lam Rim, which is basically going through the Four Noble Truths. First truth is suffering. So there's different lists of different kinds of sufferings. And, we meditate on those in order to generate renunciation, the determination to free ourselves from suffering. And with compassion, we can meditate on those different types of suffering to generate the wish for others to be free of suffering. So, ordinary compassion, like everybody does have a certain amount of compassion, but that compassion is mainly related to the first of the three types of suffering. Like one of those lists is three types of suffering, which is suffering of change, and pervasive suffering. So suffering of suffering is all the obvious suffering. So sickness and pain and injury and war and hunger and, you don't have to be a meditator to know about that kind of suffering. Everybody, immediately, as soon as we experience that kind of suffering, we know this is suffering and I want to be rid of it. And so, compassion related to that type of suffering, the obvious type of suffering, is not so difficult to cultivate. But then the second of the three types of sufferings is, it's called the suffering of change. And that's more difficult to understand because it looks like happiness. It looks like pleasure. It's ordinary samsaric experiences that are pleasant, but because they don't last, they're very impermanent, very transitory, and they quickly vanish and leave us back where we were before with our old problems. So like, for example, eating food, it's delicious, we enjoy it, we're satisfied for a few hours, but eventually we're hungry again, we have to eat again. So it just gives it very short-term, transitory kind of pleasure rather than anything long-term and lasting and satisfying. So that's considered another type of suffering, although the word suffering is a little maybe not appropriate here. The Sanskrit and Pali term is dukkha, and it's sometimes better translated as unsatisfactoriness, a lack of satisfaction. So the second type of suffering is transient pleasure, samsaric pleasure that doesn't last and doesn't satisfy. So it's unsatisfactoriness. So we need to be aware that that too is a kind of suffering that we wish not just ourselves but others, other sentient beings, to be free of. Although it's almost contradictory, because with loving kindness we wish them to have happiness, including the happiness of having food and clothes and so on and so forth. But now we're wishing them to be free of that type of experience, which is also a kind of suffering. Sounds kind of contradictory, doesn't it? But I think we just have to know that, yes, everybody, those who have stomachs, do need food to eat. And so, so we do wish everyone to have that. But at the same time, we have to be aware that that is not genuine happiness, not genuine pleasure. And having attachment to that, grasping at that is something that just perpetuates suffering. So we do wish sentient beings to be free of samsara with all the different kinds of unsatisfactory experiences within it. But as long as they are in samsara, may they have the food they need. Does that make sense? Yeah. We have to do a little bit of mental gymnastics there. And then the third type of suffering is pervasive suffering. And that refers just to our basic existence in samsara, having this body and mind that are the result of karma and afflictions. So having a life consisting of a body and mind that comes about due to ignorance and other afflictions and karma. So this itself is is like suffering. It's an unsatisfactory situation. It's impermanent. We're unable to have genuine peace and happiness, but we're subject to all different kinds of problems and suffering. So just having a samsaric life, a samsaric rebirth, body and mind in samsara, that itself is a kind of suffering, pervasive suffering. It's said to be pervasive because it pervades the whole of samsara. Wherever you are in samsara, even in the celestial realms, which are very blissful and pure and have almost zero suffering, gross suffering, but they're still stuck in samsara, stuck, trapped in karma and afflictions, not free of those. So that's more difficult to understand, more subtle. But we try to generate an understanding of that third type of suffering, and then when we can, bring that into our contemplation of compassion, so that we wish sentient beings to be free, not just from obvious, gross forms of suffering, but even subtler ones, down to just the fact of being in samsara and not being completely free. So the more we can understand suffering, the different kinds of suffering, different degrees of suffering, then the more expansive and deep our compassion will be. And in the prayer of the Four Immeasurables, we say, may all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. So we want them to be free not just from their present suffering, but the causes of suffering, which are mainly non-virtue, non-virtuous states of mind like anger and attachment, the various afflictions, and then non-virtuous actions, negative karma that they create under the influence of afflictions. So those are the main causes of suffering. So as long as they still are caught in those, they still have these afflictions in their mind and they're acting them out and creating negative karma, then they just keep circling in samsara and experiencing suffering. So we need to understand the causes of suffering and wish sentient beings to be free from those. So you can see there's a lot that you can contemplate when cultivating compassion and gradually deepening your compassion for others. So when meditating on compassion, you can do it in a similar way to the meditation on love. You start with those that you naturally have good feelings for. They're easier to feel compassion for, and get familiar with doing the practice with them. Then you can gradually move on to the strangers, those who are a little more distant, and then eventually move on to the difficult ones, the enemies. And again, it's good to do it one person at a time rather than a big group. I mean, it's not wrong or bad to meditate on compassion for a whole group of people, like all the Ukrainians or all the people in Yemen, or all the people who are hungry. I mean, it's good to do that, but it's more powerful and more genuine if you're able to focus on one person at a time and really contemplate their experiences of suffering and generate this wish for that person to be free of their suffering and its causes. And we also need to include ourselves. Compassion for ourselves. Although when prior to the development of bodhicitta, there's the meditation to develop renunciation, the determination to be free of samsara. And that could also, I don't know if I remember if I mentioned it here or not, but that could also be called self-compassion. Did I talk about that already? Yeah, and I know Venerable Children talks about it as well. So that's like self-compassion, because we are focusing on our own situation of being in samsara and how, we are trapped in having afflictions and karma and having to die and be reborn again and again. So we get a sense of that and wish ourselves to be free of that and make this determination, I'm going to do what it takes to get myself out of this situation. So that's self-compassion, although it's not traditionally called that, but it is. we wanting ourselves to be free of suffering and making the resolve that we'll do it. I'm going to do what it takes to get myself out of suffering. So we're already doing that meditation on self-compassion prior to generating bodhicitta, but we can still insert it here. So when you're doing compassion meditation and thinking of all sentient beings, you can also bring yourself in, either at the beginning or at the end or in the middle or wherever works best. Yeah, so maybe tomorrow morning meditation, who's ever leading that, could lead a meditation on compassion. And then one thing with meditation on compassion, when we do start becoming more aware of the suffering of others, if we're not careful, it can lead to feelings of despair, depression, personal distress. And so we need to be careful and try to avoid that. If we just feel kind of overwhelmed by suffering and then feel, it's helpless, it's hopeless, it's never going to end, there's nothing that can be done. So those kind of thoughts that come up in the mind are not at all helpful. And if we're not careful, we might even give up this kind of practice because, it's just making us feel depressed. And a lot of people end up feeling that way just by reading the newspaper and the news and so on. So you probably all know that state of mind. So we need to be careful and avoid that. And I think that within Buddhism, there are some of the other points that we learn about and meditate on can be used to prevent that kind of distress and despair. First of all, just to recognize that when your mind does get into that state, it's not helpful, it's not productive, and it's even harmful and counterproductive. So it's good to have mindfulness and introspective alertness. Notice if that is happening in your mind and try not to let it continue. Try to apply some antidote to get yourself out of that state of mind. Yeah, so don't just let your mind go with that way of thinking. So then some antidotes or other thoughts that we could have to counteract that would be just contemplating the Four Noble Truths, basic teachings of the Buddha, which say there is suffering. Suffering is a reality. It's part of this world of samsara that we are in. It's something inevitable. But there's a cause of it. It has causes, and it's possible to eliminate the causes of suffering, and in that way to eliminate suffering. So just remind yourself of that basic teaching that the Buddha gave, which basically says, yeah, there's suffering, but it doesn't have to last forever. It's possible to eliminate, possible to overcome, and here's how to do it. So the Buddha taught the methods for eliminating suffering, and if we put our effort into it, then it can be done. So yes, it's there, it's a reality. However, it's not something that's going to be there forever. It's not like a permanent fixture that can never be eliminated. It can be eliminated. And it's also impermanent even in a short-term sense. You know, we get a headache, and it lasts for a while, but eventually it goes away. We feel depressed, and that lasts for a while, but eventually it goes away. So just by looking at our experiences, unpleasant experiences, whether they're physical or emotional, we can see that they're not permanent. They don't last forever. If we just wait a while, eventually they'll go away. But we can also make them go away faster, or at least work on our mind so that we're not so bothered by them. We don't have to be unhappy, miserable about them. So there are things that can be done. And actually, that itself is very helpful. There's this verse in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. There's different ways of translating that text, Bodhicitta. But one of my favorite verses in there says, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what's the use of being unhappy about something if it can't be remedied? So that's a very helpful thing to keep in mind. If there's a problem, and whether it's physical, mental, both, you look at if there's a remedy, if there's something you can do to eliminate it. And sometimes there is. Sometimes there are things you can do to get rid of this problem, or at least alleviate it, make it better. So put your energy into that rather than just sitting around feeling miserable, complaining, blaming, feeling sorry for yourself. So put your energy into a remedy to this problem. But on the other hand, there isn't always a remedy. Like with the weather, we can't do much about that. We can't change the sky, the weather. So if there's nothing that can be done, then better to accept it. And there's probably things we can do to make do, stay comfortable or keep our mind happy in spite of this problem being there. So it's similar to the what's called a serenity prayer in Alcoholics Anonymous, which goes, let's see if I can remember it. Lord, grant me the serenity to to accept what can't be changed, the courage to change what can be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. Is that it? Yeah. I really like that. It goes even further than Shantideva, because, the wisdom to know the difference, to be able to recognize when there's a remedy and when there isn't, when you can do something, when you can't, and then accept. So that's a very helpful advice to keep in mind when there are problems. And also, another thought would be, problems aren't necessarily bad, in the sense that people can sometimes learn and grow from going through difficulties. That doesn't mean we should just let people suffer and not try to help them when they are suffering. Of course, if someone's having a problem and we can help them, we do try to help them. But on the other hand, going through that problem, that difficulty might be helpful for them. They might learn something. They might grow. There's lots of stories like that of people going through difficulties, even, having cancer or losing their dearest friend or relative. And it's really, really painful. But within that pain, within that suffering, they learn wisdom, compassion, they find resilience. So often they come out a very different person than before. So contemplating that, especially if you can think of examples in your own experience and the experience of others, that could also help you to be not so depressed or feeling despair about suffering. That doesn't mean we want people to suffer, we look for it. No, it's already there. There's already enough of it. We don't have to make more. But just to see it in a different way. It's not necessarily so bad. It can be helpful. And then finally, instead of letting your mind get caught up in despair and depression and hopelessness and pessimism and those kind of things, see if there's something you can do about the problem. And, if it's somebody else's suffering, somebody else's problem, try your best to help them, to relieve them. But at the same time, it's important to accept our limitations. Sometimes we expect too much of ourselves. We expect to be able to solve the problem and make everything okay, and the person won't have any more suffering, any more problems. So that's probably unreasonable. I mean, we have the wish to do that, but we also have to be realistic that we may not be able to do that. And so, like the question that came up the other day, we sometimes want to help somebody and we try to help somebody, but things go wrong and we may even make things worse for them. So, but it is important to have the wish to help, have as much as possible genuine compassion, and do what you can within your means, within your knowledge and wisdom and skill. Do what you can to help them. But it's also important to accept that even if we were Buddha, even if we were an enlightened being, we may not be able to get rid of somebody's problem. So there's lots of stories like that where even the people around the Buddha, close to the Buddha, some of them had sickness, some of them had mental problems, some of them had afflictive states of mind, even hating the Buddha, wanting to kill the Buddha. So the Buddha, being present, wasn't able to eliminate those problems. So even a Buddha isn't able to take away suffering and problems from others, because each person, each sentient being is responsible for their own suffering. Because of their afflictions and karma, they create their own suffering, and nobody can take it away from them or eliminate it for them. They have to do it themselves. So each of us has to free ourselves from suffering. No one else, even a Buddha, can do that for us. So for me, that was really helpful to remember that when, in times when I tried to help somebody and I wasn't able to help them, and then I'd get really upset with myself and depressed and so on. So I remember that, well, even if I was a Buddha, I probably wouldn't have been able to, stop this problem for the person. So, yeah. And most of us are not Buddhas, so we're much more limited in our ability to help. So we need to accept that, accept our limitations, do what we can, try to help as much as we can, but accept if we're not able to fully help them. Okay, so those are some things that I think if we contemplate and get familiar with, hopefully they will help us avoid that sort of pitfall of feeling depressed or hopeless or pessimistic when we do start to open up more to the existence of suffering. So we need to watch our mind and, meditate on suffering to the extent that it helps us have more compassion, but not in a way that leads to depression and despair. Does that make sense? Okay, so yeah, I think tomorrow morning we can finish a little bit more about compassion, and then we can do the last 2 points, which are quite connected. So we can finish this 7-point method, and then I'll talk about the other method for generating bodhicitta.
Can I ask or make a statement about Geshe Chambatekso's question and answer? I'm a little surprised by that because I I would have thought that Buddhists had compassion for all beings simply because of their wisdom. They see that the suffering can be removed. It's unnecessary. It wouldn't have anything to do with the Buddha, I would think, whether that person had been kind to them or not. Buddhas have equanimity. So I just find that a little bit different than how I had been thinking about it myself.
Yeah, I think we were all kind of surprised because we hadn't heard that before. But then if you think about the cultivation of bodhicitta, especially this method for cultivating bodhicitta, and how it does involve thinking that everybody has been your mother, and then they've been kind, not only as your mother, but as your father, and all these other things. So, I mean, this is what a person would meditate on and get a realization of as they're developing bodhicitta and becoming a bodhisattva. So by the time they're a bodhisattva, and certainly by the time they're Buddha, that's something they would be fully aware of, fully familiar with. So, I can't say why he said what he did, but it did make sense to me that, yeah, I mean, and just trying to imagine what that would be like to have the mind of a Buddha and have total recall of all of your previous lives and all of your interactions, your relationships with other sentient beings, and being able to directly remember how they have helped you and been kind to you.
But you would have
I mean,
remembered
there's
all
still-
the times they were
Sorry?
snotty to you, too.
Huh?
You would have remembered all the harm, too.
You would remember all the harm, but you know that that harm comes about because of ignorance and delusion. And again, that's why you're so determined to free them from that situation where they are under the control of ignorance and so on. And being a Buddha, you don't mind if they hurt you or not. I mean, you're way beyond that. I don't know. I can't really say why he said what he said, but I found it quite powerful to contemplate. And it may not be the only reason why the Buddha has compassion for all living beings. I mean, many other reasons as well. But like I said, it was kind of a startling thing to hear and think about.